Give him a very, very warm round of applause. It's Matt Wheeler. Matt.
Hi, so I'm Matt Wheeler. I'm the Digital Director of madeby.studio, and I'm going to talk to you today about whether your website is accessible, because it's probably not. But before I start off with why your website is probably not accessible, I'm going to go over a few facts and figures. So 96.3% of home pages have detected Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2 failures. So this is just home pages alone, tested over 1 million websites by WebAIM. And then when we consider that 24% of people in the UK have a disability, and that the web is fundamentally designed to work for all, and when the web meets this goal, it is accessible to people with a diverse range of hearing, movement, sight, and cognitive ability. So we refer back to those two statistics. If we've got 96.3% of web content accessibility guideline failures, but we've got 24% of people with disabilities, the web is fundamentally not designed for all as it is, because it's not working for all because of all these failures. And what I've seen more recently is this rise of accessibility overlays, which in some respects are great, but they only solve about 30% of the problem. So let's say you've got someone with dyslexia, you can modify the fonts using these tools, which make it a dyslexic-friendly font. If you've got someone with colour blindness, it can change the colour contrast for the different types of colour blindness, although these widgets and overlays are an afterthought, whereas accessibility should always be a forethought within your website design. And another problem I've spotted with these is they have an AI behind the scenes, but there's no one actually checking what the AI is doing. So let's say you've got empty alternative attributes or images, or you've got missing labels. What they do, they fill in the blanks based on an assumption and prediction, although sometimes they can get it wrong. So when someone's using a screen reader, for example, it can actually misinform the user of what the content on the page is saying, which is, in my opinion, worse than no content at all, because if it doesn't read the content, that person's never going to actually hear it, and it will never kind of realize it's wrong. But if it's misinforming, it's going to cause confusion to that user in their journey. And another problem I've spotted with these as well is they're not very good at state changes. So if you're using a framework such as Vue or React, and you have a complete state change, these widgets and overlays don't actually keep up with it. And again, it can misinform the user of what the content of the page is, creating more confusion. So if you've got one of these on your website, probably check if it's actually doing the job that it's intended. So where does accessibility actually start? Well, it ultimately starts at that brand. So when you've got a logo designer or a brand designer, and they're developing that logo, they need to be checking, is the typography going to be legible on small screens? Is the color contrast going to be legible? And then when they're designing that brand guidelines or brand Bible or whatever you want to call it, they need to be considering the accessibility. And I've looked at about 30, 40, 50 different kind of brand guidelines, and I've never actually seen a page that talks about the accessibility of the brand. And this is even for huge organizations, where in my opinion, I think it should be kind of essential, because it's what provides an inclusive and accessible experience. So when this brand guideline gets handed over to UI UX designer, they can take that accessibility features and make sure that they are taking consideration of accessibility throughout the whole process of the web design, and it'll prevent these afterthoughts of having overlays and whatnot. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of everyone. So if you've got kind of developers putting the technical features and functionalities in there, they need to be considering, are they using the right best practices for accessibility? The same with kind of considering the different user agents and different devices, because there's people that have to use screen readers, so have they put those functionalities in there to make it usable by those users as well? But then you've got like the content editors and the SEOs and marketers that are filling in the content, which also needs to have an awareness of how to write accessible content, which comes into this kind of simplified writing and being explicitly defining the actions of certain features through the written text. And this is the most common accessibility failures on home pages alone. So it's not even cross-site-wide, this is just on home pages tested across those million websites. And the biggest one is this low contrast text, which is 83.6%, which really frustrates me because it's actually a very simple thing to solve. So let's say you're a UI UX designer and you design a website in Figma. There is plugins which you can install which cross-reference against the WCAG2 guidelines to prevent this happening. The same with typography. So if you've got a recommended minimum of 16 pixels, it can just check that for you and tell you if you're breaking the accessibility guidelines. So before that gets sent over to a developer, you can ensure that the accessibility is kind of funneled all the way through the process of building the website. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but they're all on the WebAIM kind of accessibility stuff, which I can send out after if anyone wants to connect on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatnot. Well, you've got kind of like the empty links, the empty buttons, which again, that comes down to developer best practices, as well as those content editors that are filling in the content as well, just to ensure they are providing a truly accessible experience. So why should you make your website accessible? So the biggest one is there's more criticality on user experience, because as a UI UX designer, you can design an incredible experience. You can do really fancy transitions, mad layouts, and just sliders everywhere. Although it might look really cool, and it might get you an awards on the awards-winning website stuff, although it's not an accessible experience in most cases, because it's very difficult to provide that inclusive experience. So when you're considering the accessibility all the way through, it makes you think, is this just there to look cool, or is it going to provide an experience where everyone can actually get that content that they need to? And then the second was the accessibility and the SEO work together. So again, with SEO, Google uses it as a metric for SEO. So when it's scanning it, you just need to ensure that you're following best SEO practices, and in turn, that tends to help accessibility as well, because it's about written content, writing in plain English and whatnot. And then the final one is reaching a wider audience. So as I mentioned before, we've got 24% of people in the UK that have a disability. Admittedly, not all those people have a reduced web experience due to their disabilities, although a portion of them do. So why would you cut those out the experience and the content that you want to provide? Because fundamentally, the web is designed for all, so we should be considering every single user on the web, including those that need the accessible functionalities. But the key takeaway I want to have at the end of this lightning talk is the 4 principles of accessibility. So the first one is perceivable. So that's kind of navigating a website through multiple senses, so not just sight, but also by hearing as well. Like these here are the perfect example of multiple senses as accessibility. And then you've got the operable, which is following the navigation best practices. Are you following the correct structure where it can actually be usable via kind of obviously sight, keyboard, mouse, touch, or via your screen reader as well? And then is it understandable, which is it following plain English? Is everything explicitly defining what is going to happen, and is it predictable? So for examples, rather than having a button that just says read more, if a screen reader reads that out, the user's not actually going to understand what read more means. So you should be explicitly defining the action that's going to happen, which should be like read more about X, just so it's predictable again. And then the final one, is it robust enough? So have you considered all the different kind of edge case scenarios? So not just kind of people with dyslexia, people with color blindness, but also the different user agents, the different devices, and people that are going to be using screen readers. Have you ensured that you've provided the accessibility functionality for those different areas? And this is a tool that I've never actually heard anyone talk about yet, but it's the IBM Equal Access Accessibility Checker, a bit of a long-winded name, but it comes from the IBM Equal Access Toolkit, which is a lot of research that IBM's doing into accessibility. And essentially, this is just like a Chrome extension that works just like a Google Lighthouse audit. So you just run it, and it does a full accessibility audit. And this one is on my personal website, and you can see I've got a 94% on my current status. And the reason is because I've got 0 violations, but then I've got 13 warnings. And what this tool does, it goes through every single accessibility feature on the website, tested against the WCA G2 guidelines, and provides recommendations. When you get a warning, it's essentially that the tool can't guarantee that what you've done is accessible, and you need a human intervention to check, is it accessible, because it can't guarantee it. So for example, if you've got kind of pseudo elements with a bit of content in, it doesn't know whether that is decorative or whether that's actually meant to be readable. So it just holds you accountable. It's a very simple thing to do. So if you're going to do one thing after this talk, is just install this Chrome extension and just see what the warnings are, because you can go through and just start fixing them very easily, because it gives you the code snippets essentially and reference to the docs just to make those fixes. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.